tonight, which is called Ready for 100. It's about renewable energy, and it's a program that the National Sierra Club has forwarded or put forward, and it has been adopted by the city of Sarasota. And the city of Sarasota is among 100 cities in the United States that have adopted it, and there have been 3 states that have adopted it. Okay?
How's everybody doing this evening?
Great.
All right. We've had a pretty full program already, so learned a lot of good stuff. So I appreciated the comments and learned quite a bit about fish farms. So we're going to switch gears a bit and talk about decarbonization. We're going to talk about how we can lower our emissions footprint in Sarasota as a community. So prior to tonight, who had heard of the Ready for 100 campaign? Okay, so pretty knowledgeable room. As far as this goes. So I'm going to cover some of the campaign, overview history. We're going to talk a little bit about climate change impacts locally, what we can expect, what we want to avoid, and then we're going to look at what we can do collectively to ensure that we have a clean air, clean water, and clean energy future. So we're going to start with just a quick video that I think does a good job of giving an overview of this campaign.
Seventh generation and hundreds of community partners, 100 cities across the U.S. are committed to clean energy.
Favor of the motion.
What that means, cleaner air, better health for over 40 million people. And this is future generation. 5 cities clean energy. And by the end,
I'm not going to make you suffer through some glitchy Bluetooth. It was working an hour ago, but so it goes. So let's move on. I'm just going to keep going.
Okay.
So, Ready for 100. This campaign is about harnessing local, city, and community action to move us to a 100% renewable energy future. So, in the 3 years since this launched, just to be clear, as Kathy said, this is Sierra Club nationally that's spearheading this, but it's really volunteer-driven on the ground by local organizers and involved community people. So in the 3 years since this has been going, over 140 cities in the U.S. have made these 100% renewable energy commitments. So these are time-bound commitments where these communities are saying, we're going to get to 100% by date X. And that date varies some from community to community. So far, 6 of those cities have actually reached this goal. We have Aspen, Colorado, Burlington, Vermont, Georgetown, Texas, Greensburg, Kansas, Rockport, Missouri, and Kodiak Island, Alaska. So a pretty geographically diverse group, pretty politically diverse as well. So they've provided proof of concept that this is actually possible to do. Because of the groundswell of activity at the city level, we've also seen states responding. So there are 7 states that now have 100% targets. Hawaii, California, New Mexico, Nevada, Washington State, New York, Maine, as well as the District of Columbia and Puerto Rico. So when you add all of that up, we now have 1 in 4 people in the United States now living under a commitment. Obviously we get quite a bit with California, but the others are nothing to sneeze at. So that's impressive. I mean, for 3 years of progress, that is quite a bit of geography to cover. And we're also seeing that utilities are starting to respond to this. So Xcel Energy, which is a pretty big investor-owned utility, I think they're up in the Twin Cities, they're in Colorado, they have actually announced they're going to be going 100% carbon-free as a result of commitments in their service area. So obviously, this is something that has to be watched, there needs to be vigilance, but it's a good thing in general if you have an investor-owned utility pledging to decarbonize. We don't have that yet with FPL, which we'll talk about. So some of the local history. We got this going, this campaign began in January of 2017, just with some conversations among interested people. And between, I'd say, February and June, we ran a local campaign, petition signatures, meeting with elected officials like the mayor and her fellow commissioners, community presentations, the standard approach of grassroots organizing. And in June 2017, there was a 5-0 vote for the City Commission to adopt the Ready for 100 program in the city of Sarasota. And so what does that mean? Well, here in Sarasota, the commitment is that city operations will be 100% renewable energy by 2030. So that's city buildings, it's the city transportation, all of that, 2030. And then citywide, so residents and businesses within the city, institutions within the city by 2045. And part of the reason that 2045 date is a little out there is that the city is in a franchise lease agreement with FPL through 2040. So we did want to hedge in case FPL drags their feet. You know, this would provide a little bit of a buffer there. But even 2045, you know, is a very ambitious date in some ways. Others would maybe say it's not soon enough. Sarasota is not alone in this. We were the second city in the state of Florida to adopt these targets. And again, this, you know, the dates vary by community. St. Petersburg was the first, so we both tip our hat and shake our fist at them. You also see Orlando, Gainesville, Tallahassee, Dunedin, Safety Harbor, Satellite Beach, Largo, and South Miami. So those are places where these resolutions have passed. There are other cities where there have been, you know, mayoral proclamations and things of that nature, but we're really looking at resolutions here. And there are many other campaigns underway in Miami proper and in some of the other bigger cities throughout the state. So that's a little bit of background on the campaign, and we can do some Q&A at the end if you have more questions about that. We'll talk about implementation here in a moment, but I want to pivot for a few minutes to discuss local threats that we're facing with climate change. And some of this may be kind of a rehash if you follow this, and if not, maybe you'll learn something. So I don't think we need sound for this video. I think the visual is quite enough. It was all working at home, I promise.
Naturally. The wonders of tech.
All right, so this was a video. What's that?
Can we elevate it a little bit?
The projector?
Yeah.
It has a little.
Is that better?
Does that help people see better? It's not helping our video, unfortunately. So this video, some of you may have seen this. This was footage that was taken on Longboat Key on a sunny day flooding incident. Are folks familiar with sunny day flooding? Yes. Yeah. Is there anyone who wants me to explain that? Sure. Sunny day flooding is basically what it sounds like. It is, the streets are flooding, but it is not raining. So why are the streets flooding? Well, they're flooding because it is a high tide, maybe an unusually high tide, and that water is being pushed up through our storm drain system out onto the roads. This is a significant problem. It's already happening now. It's been happening for at least a few years since I've been hearing about it here, maybe longer. We know that this is going to cause a lot of problems. It's not just the salt water washes up and it, kills people's lawns. That's unfortunate. Vehicle damage is unfortunate. You get salt up under you people from the north don't need me to explain that to you. So I hear. I've never lived north of Dallas, but I hear salt's bad for your cars. But there's a more serious problem as well. Has anybody been following what's going on in Fort Lauderdale over the past couple of months? They've had some problems. Over 100 million gallons of sewage has spilled out into their waterways. Now, there's a lot of factors driving that. One is, in true Florida fashion, just decades of deferred maintenance on their wastewater pipes. But there's a variable that's accelerating the deterioration of those wastewater pipes. What is that? It's saltwater. It is rising seas. They are getting saltwater intrusion. It is corrosive. They're getting leaks inside their pipes. It's bringing dirt and silt. The pipes are getting corroded, worn out. They're leaking. They're failing. It's accelerating the failure of their infrastructure, which, as we know, sewage being spilled into waterways is not good, certainly for public health, but it also feeds things like red tide. All the discussion we've had over the past couple of years about nutrients, you can sort of cross-apply that to this. Climate change is a force multiplier. It will take things that are already posing challenges in our communities, and it will intensify that. So sunny day flooding is really already doing that, and we can assume it's having those effects on our infrastructure as well. It's not going to get better in the near term. NOAA's already projecting 8 inches by 2030, and that's what this video was actually. This was the Spaceship Earth video, I apologize, where they went to Siesta Key, and they showed what 8 inches of rise was going to do, and then they showed where it was going to be by 2060. And essentially by 2060, just under the intermediate projections, you're looking at high tide will be up onto the road now. So the beach is wiped out. That's what this video was. But there's also a sunny day flooding video. So we can think of the 8 inches that we're facing in 2030 and what that's going to do to our beaches, the ripple effect that will have on our economy, the effect it will have on other aspects of the environment. There's going to be calls for hardening, building more seawalls, more gray infrastructure. We know that poses challenges to a lot of the coastal ecosystems, marine ecosystems in this area. So, 8 inches by 2030 is happening. We know from the tidal gauge, and this was the sunny day flooding video, we know from the tidal gauge that NOAA runs in St. Petersburg that we've already had about an inch of sea level rise per decade since 1946. Right? So, about 6 inches, 7 inches nearly since 1946. So about an average of an inch a decade. We can anticipate that this is going to have implications on our water supply. Again, saltwater intrusion into drinking water aquifers. It's certainly a concern in southeast Florida. And so as water supply issues intensify in southeast Florida, one scenario one can envision is it's going to put more demand on water sources from the interior of the peninsula, which are currently the ones that we rely on in this area, right, from the Peace River and others. So it's going to create a significant amount of infrastructure needs for adaptations. So those seawalls I was talking about a moment ago, we hope that we can make them more ecologically friendly, that we can do living shorelines, but it's very likely that there's going to be a lot of adaptation infrastructure. Just the expected costs in this region alone, and this comes from the Center for Climate Integrity, is $3 billion in Southwest Florida by 2040. So that is quite a bit, and they're looking at really what's the infrastructure they're talking about in this is dealing with chronic inundation, so largely seawalls. Statewide, these costs could be $76 billion by 2040. These are significant sums of money, and we're in a state without property tax, so where is the money going to come from? We are also facing, at the same time, these sort of climate factors are intensifying. We have a lot of political paralysis currently. At the state level, Florida gets an F from the Center for Biological Diversity in terms of the overall policy environment for renewable energies. So basically everything that California is doing, we're doing the opposite in Florida, which is a curious proposal given that we have so much shoreline here. You think that maybe there'd be a little bit more focus, but I hear that you can say climate change again in Tallahassee, so maybe after 20 more years of talking,
but then you have to say it's a lie.
Yeah. So we are number 3. This always gets me Florida has the #3 potential for solar energy productivity. I think Arizona is pretty high, maybe Nevada. But less than 2% of our actual energy comes from New Jersey, comes from solar. I got ahead of myself there. For many years, we actually were ranked behind New Jersey in terms of solar energy production, which is remarkable because it's dark by like 3 o'clock there in the winter, and 2:30 latest. No, it's a dark, damp place, and yet they have more solar production than we do in Florida. So again, that ties directly back to the regulatory environment that we have. We do not have any renewable portfolio standards for our utilities in Florida. What's a renewable portfolio standard? It's when there is there's binding legislation that requires that utilities source X% of their electricity from renewable sources. So Texas, a red state, has had RPS in effect for quite a while, and they have, through that, developed a very impressive wind power industry over there. Now they have the wind resources where that's there, but again, we have the solar resources. So there is no requirement coming out of Tallahassee to actually move the market in favor of solar. Ratepayers have no choice of energy provider. It's essentially a monopoly system. There are other states where there's a deregulated market, and so there's kind of a wonky debate on the pros and cons of those, but it's just worth noting that in Florida, consumers do not have choice. There was going to be a ballot amendment, but that just got tossed, I think. I read that today or yesterday. So the Supreme Court in Florida ruled that the language was misleading on this ballot amendment that would have deregulated the market here. So for the foreseeable future, we're still going to be essentially have no choice over who our utilities are, our electricity provider. And so it really starts to hem in your options as a resident or someone who maybe wants to make a change. And we don't have community solar. Are people familiar with community solar? This is where, say you live in an apartment, you live in a condo, or you just maybe have a big live oak over your house like I do. So for whatever reason, you're not a good candidate to have solar on your rooftop. Community solar would be a way that in other states where this is allowed, you can basically buy a subscription of a little solar farm somewhere, and that's how you would source your electricity, essentially. You're buying a share of that installation's production. We can't do that here in Florida, and there's really not a good reason for it, other than the utilities don't like it. The one bright spot, we do have net metering here. So this is good if you have solar on your rooftop, you already know this, but your excess production, if it's a bright sunny day and you're not using a lot of electricity, you're sending excess back to the grid. In Florida, you do get reimbursed for that. The utility buys that electricity back from you. Now we've already seen, I believe in Jacksonville, the utility there has slashed the net metering rate. I think the Peace River Electricity Co-op also slashed theirs. So pay attention to those. Those are going to be kind of running battles where, as more people install rooftop solar and the utilities are paying out more and more for net metering, they're going to come along and they're going to try to sort of implement a rearguard action and slash that net metering. So that's going to be an ongoing fight, but for the most part, Florida has pretty good net metering. So we know that climate change is going to bring a lot of health and ecological risks. We'll talk a little bit more about those momentarily. But I think this is really interesting, and I'm sure it's something that the mayor's familiar with. Climate risk is being incorporated into municipal credit rating analyses. So when these credit rating agencies are looking at a municipality and they're assessing its climate risk, they want to know if that municipality is taking commensurate action. The higher your risk, the higher your action, which I think makes sense from a sort of actuarial standpoint. So we have a lot of risk in Sarasota. We're a coastal community, and so Moody's and other organizations are going to be looking to see what do we do. And of course the impact to this is if you get a downgraded credit rating, then it's going to cost more money when you have to go to the bond market. So if we aren't taking action, climate impacts are stacking up, which means we're going to need to go to the bond market to pay for all the adaptation we're going to need, you're going to then be paying a higher interest rate on top of that. So it's a bit of a negative feedback loop there. And you know, these, just, you may not be able to read this, but they're looking at highest risk cities. In this group, 427, which I believe Moody's has a controlling interest in this firm. They're sort of a risk analysis firm, and they're really focused specifically on climate change. But they have Sarasota at the very, very high up in their rankings of risk, and Manatee County is at the top of their counties list. So if you're sitting here and you're feeling kind of glib, just assuming it's going to be worse in Miami and Fort Lauderdale, well, it's not going to be that much better here. So
What is the second column, where Sarasota's at the bottom?
That's counties, county ranks. So
Because we have the north, we have areas to the east.
yeah, I assume so. So some of the impacts, you know, we can move, I think, pretty quickly on this because this gets a lot of coverage. But in general, you know, the consensus is it's going to lead to likely more frequent and more intense hurricanes as we experience warming. Warming waters are going to feed these hurricanes. We're already starting to see these. The intensification of Hurricane Michael was really kind of a big deal, I thought, last year. I mean, that thing went from a Category 2 when it was a day out to a Category 5 as it got over those very warm near-shore waters. $7 billion in property damage. I was driving up through that area for the holidays, and I mean, Panama City Beach, I think, has lost over 90% of its canopy. I mean, it's just, it's decimated over there. And that was one storm. Of course, it's going to lead to increases in insurance rates for just everyday people that are trying to live in these communities. You know, if you pay insurance here, you know that it's generally not getting cheaper. And then, you know, there's been some interesting reports lately about what we can expect for these extreme heat days, or what they call days above 90 degrees Fahrenheit. And so you can see in Sarasota, if we're looking at a heat index of 105, that's what this is, it says we have historically experienced 2 days with a heat index above 105. Historically. If we take no action on emissions by late century, and I think they were, you know, calling that 2080 or so, we can expect 126 days of a heat index above 105. So that's going from 2 days to 4 months of a 105 heat index. If we take rapid action, like really throw our weight into it, we can contain that at about 47, 50 days of extreme heat, right? So just with a lot of this, a lot of these impacts are really kind of baked in, and what we're trying to do is prevent worst case scenarios. But the impacts that this is already going to have on the elderly, on the infirm, on farm workers, maintenance, you know, landscape workers, people who are working outside, is really quite severe. It's also going to have impacts on cost-burdened households who are paying a disproportionate share of their monthly income, you know, whether that's because they're fixed income or they're low-wage workers, they're paying disproportionate share on electricity bills. If you are throwing in extreme heat on top of that, you know, how are people actually just going to be able to pay to keep the air on, to, you know, to not die in some cases? This doesn't get talked about probably enough, in my opinion, but you know, one of the benefits of decarbonization is that we're also reducing a lot of other emissions, a lot of other sources of air pollution. And so you can see just from your standard tailpipe emissions, you have carbon monoxide, you have nitrogen oxide, sulfur dioxide, hydrocarbons, particulate matter, and aromatics. That's all going up in the air today when we drive. And so the elimination of those tailpipe emissions can really help reduce some dissolved nitrogen. And we know that dissolved nitrogen, you know, from these tailpipe emissions is one of the nutrient factors that's probably contributing to these intense red tide outbreaks. So So that's a little bit on red tide. Ocean acidification is really happening independently of warming water as well, right? So this is an impact of the carbon emissions. And essentially, our oceans function as a carbon sink, so when there's land-based carbon emissions, the oceans actually soak up a decent amount of that atmospheric CO2. But as they do that, it changes the pH in the oceans. It changes the balance, and so those oceans start to acidify. And you know, I'm sure as Dr. Morris could tell us, and others in the crowd, this poses a lot of threat to. Are you a doctor? I assume. Well, an honorary doctor. I was impressed with your comments. So this is going to weaken a lot of the the corals, oysters, clams, things that are shellfish that rely on those sorts of systems are going to be really at risk. So this is one of the things where you can imagine, you have keystone species like corals or oysters that are at risk because of ocean acidification, and that really poses sort of cascading impacts throughout those systems. So a little bit on the just what we need to do, and there was just another round of UN talks on this, and we could have updated the slide. I mean, that piece of the picture hasn't necessarily gotten any better, but looking at just this big 2018 report that came out by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, where they were saying, look, if we want to limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, then we really have to just mobilize like hell in the 2020s, right? This was the 12-year report that got a lot of press. So knowing that the global goal is net zero emissions, zero carbon emissions by 2050, means we need to have 50% reductions by 2030, which is pretty staggering, right? We have a decade to cut global carbon emissions. And if you think about sort of the development curve in South Asia and Southeast Asia, what that really means is that in wealthy countries like the US and in Western Europe, we need to be well beyond 50% reductions by 2030. We need to be ahead of this curve and help facilitate it globally, not just saying, well, no, we have till 2050 to get to 100 and kick the can down the road. So this is, I won't get into the details of it, but I think the main thing to take away from these graphs is just path dependency, that the longer we prolong meaningful action, the steeper the cuts have to be on the back end, right? And we're talking about, 10% annual carbon dioxide reductions, like on the back end of some of these scenarios, whereas if you take quicker action, maybe you're looking at 3 to 4% annual, or 5 to 6%, And these increments matter when you're talking about shifting an entire economy. And of course, if we just continue to not take action, you're looking at 3.5 degrees Celsius warming probably, if we sort of let the market take its course. So, it's a lot, it's heavy. There is a lot that's already going to happen, but there's still a lot worth fighting for, and these increments are going to matter. The difference between a degree or half a degree of warming are going to matter to the people and the animals and the planet that will be experiencing those impacts. So we know we have to take action. It means individual action, but it also means community action, right? Pushing for more systemic forms of change. So the Ready for 100 campaign, we got these commitments from the city, and in the aftermath of that resolution passing in June 2017 at the City Commission, we broke into, we set up a planning process with city staff and included the sustainability staff and some folks from the planning department and others. And we looked at, okay, we don't have, I would just back up and say some communities that are, bigger and kind of getting more support on this stuff are spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on these roadmaps. They're hiring consultants, it's a very fancy process. we just did this ourselves. I mean, it was kind of we didn't have a lot of funding. You know, the city was able to put some staff into it, but that was about it. So, you know, it's not a perfectly airtight plan for how Sarasota is going to decarbonize by 2045. But we were able to, I think, get a pretty good framework in place. And so we looked at, you know, that community goal of 2045 within the city of Sarasota, the municipal operations by 2030. So how